have in different order. So the thinking process is going to be the same. So I'll come back to that a little bit later on. What usually happens, though, what we're trying to get away from, let's say a typical other mill that's not your mill, you have a morning meeting and you say, well, the motor tripped out, causing a production loss last night. What happened? What is the first thing that happens in most mills I visit, do you think? What's the first question? Huh? Do they try solving the problem in that morning meeting with production maintenance there? First ones I have is you need a lost production report. Correct? The first thing we need to figure out in that lost production is the maintenance of operations. Is that correct? You recognize this? Some of you? Maybe? You don't want to admit it? So which one is it? Well, it's a motor, so obviously it's not operations. So the whole operations department just relaxes now. It's not me. They stop thinking, right? You lose 75% of the thinking there, they say, right? We say 50%. Okay. So, maintenance. Well, it's a motor that tripped out, mechanical or E&I. Well, that's obvious. It's a motor that tripped. It's not mechanical, it's E&I. So the mechanics start relaxing, right? In that very homogeneous group of E&I, right? Is it electrical or is it instrumentation? So now it's like, well, it's a motor that tripped out, so it's not instrumentation. If you build it on instrumentation, they blame it on process control, and they start talking, no one understands what they're saying, so then, you know, they get away with it. Now it is an electrical problem, right? So now we've solved the problem, right? Lost production report says we have so much downtime to the electrical. And as you know, we're asking who? First rule of root cause is don't do the witch hunt. You've been through some of the trainings, right? Don't ask who, ask why or what happened, whatever you want to call it, right? And this goes into some type of lost production report that's then into the system and saying we have a lot of problems with electrical, so therefore top manager comes in and say, we have a lot of problems with electrical. I don't know what we're going to use this data for. Can someone tell me that? I've been only doing this for 15 years. So I ask you, what do we use this data for? So once you have lost production report, electrical, instrumentation, mechanical, and operations, what do we use that data for?
Hire more electricians.
Huh? Hire more electricians. Yeah, but they don't do that. They say they're going to do that, but they don't do that. We don't do that, right?
Cost justification.
Cost justification. Okay. Could work, right? Right? And if you use the data, fine. But most people we work with don't use the data for anything. They just have the data and collect it, and they don't use that data. What should we ask instead with this situation? Where am I getting to? Why? Who cares whose problem it is? That's a rule we have in our office, and it's not easy to follow. We don't always follow it. I'll be honest with you. But it's pretty irrelevant whose fault it was. Trying to figure out what happened, and then after you figure out what happened, maybe you need to talk about, okay, who was responsible. You may have to talk about who it was at some point, but that's not the first question, right? And what happened really was that operations overloaded the motor, and the motor tripped. The instrumentation guys went there and reset it. Is the instrumentation guy going to go there in the morning meeting and say, well, the operator did this to his buddy, the operator? No. You never find out what really happened, right? So we can't ask who. It's one of those things. So what I was saying here, in our process, what we really separate the two things. You have a thinking process, which is really the thinking steps, and how do I solve problems? The other one is the documentation tool. And you can use pretty much any documentation tool you like, whatever you prefer. I have my preference. We have our preference that we think makes sense. In some cases, you may want to use a 5Y. Sometimes you may use the 6 thinking hats. Sometimes you may use something different. And I think if you just have a basic thinking process and teach that, you can use any tool you want to do, because you'll get to the same thing. And I know most of you have used most of these tools at some point. You're very experienced.